Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Reese, and I talk about what I read and a little bit about what I write. Today is a video about what I read in the month of November, my November reading wrap-up. In the month of November, I read 6 books, and the moods, according to Storygraph, are dark, reflective, mysterious, informative, emotional, adventurous, and sad. And I mean, reflective and emotional are pretty on par for me. Maybe this month was a little darker than normal. You'll understand why. So let's get into a little bit about each book, what I liked, what I disliked, and my star rating. The first book that I read in November was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. In this book, 40 women are held captive underground and against their will under unknown circumstances. And when a mysterious incident leads to their escape, what they find above ground is even more mysterious than what was underground. This is an existential story that explores themes of isolation, community, survival, the search for meaning. Ultimately, this book explores what it means to be human. And this book was a 5-star read for me. I knew that even before halfway through. From the very first page, I was hooked. As you may have guessed, there are a lot of things about this book that I enjoyed. The first of which is the genre of book, which is post-apocalyptic, speculative literary fiction. And more specifically, women in this setting. I did a whole video about this with some other book recommendations, including this book, if you are curious. I will, I guess, link that in the description. I loved the main character. I felt very connected to her loneliness, and her determination. I enjoyed the writing. It was straightforward and economical even, but it felt like the world in which this story takes place. You know, sparse, straightforward, to the point. But I found that there was a lot of profoundness in that simplicity, and I think that you will too. There is a central mystery in this story, but I wouldn't say that plot device is the point of this story or that plot element. I see it as a metaphor for the question of what is the meaning of life, and that's something that we will probably never know in our lifetimes, and that is exactly the point. You know, all you do is keep moving one step forward, one foot in front of the other. And that image is very prevalent throughout this novel. Another thing the writer explores is the relationship between writer and reader, and how a writer's words become a part of the reader and they live on even after a writer is gone. And as a writer myself, that was very impactful to me. That hit me deep. I really loved that part of the book. What I didn't like about the book, I don't really have any criticism written down. Looking at my notes, so I know some people don't like the ending, but I wouldn't let that dissuade you from reading this book. In fact, I wouldn't even look up any of that discourse because I wouldn't want it to be spoiled for you. I would go into it with an open mind, and I promise you that you will likely be rewarded. I would recommend this book for anyone who feels alone and wants to feel seen, and for anybody who at their core feels different from people around them, and they want a book that doesn't say necessarily everything's going to be okay, but they want a book instead that says life can be tragic and beautiful at the same time, and they want to be comforted in that. The next book that I read in the month of November was Boys Enter the House. This is the stories of the victims of the serial killer John Wayne Gacy and the lives that they leave behind and their families. I would give this book 3 stars. Full disclosure, I read this as part of a book club. I do enjoy reading nonfiction, and I have listened to true crime podcasts from time to time, but it's not something I would normally pick up. I think the author David Nelson did a good job of humanizing the victims, who are often just read as names or seen as numbers of victims of John Wayne Gacy. And I think in this way that he presents the story, it creates a good flipping of the scales. This is a story about them and their families and not about Gacy, which I appreciated. One thing I didn't enjoy as much about this book is around the middle third, there is a section where there is a lot of names that sound similar and family members, and he's kind of weaving in and out of different victims and their stories. And he says that he's doing this because he's writing things thematically and not necessarily chronologically. So it makes sense. And it really does highlight some of the larger cultural and societal problems at play, like classism and homophobia, and it does a great job about highlighting that. But I did find it a little hard to track, and sometimes I had to flip back between parts of the book. And I thankfully had a physical copy from my library, but I know other people in my reading group had a Kindle version, and they were like, oh, it was so difficult. So if you are interested in this book, maybe pick up a physical copy instead of a digital version, but you know, you do you, however you like to read best. I enjoyed a physical copy of this one for that reason. For historical nonfiction, this was kind of more like long form journalism, which is totally cool if you're okay with that. I think I would tend to lean more towards creative nonfiction or literary journalism that has a little bit more narrative involved, but I think part of this was also the topic of the book. I think you should read this book if you are a true crime person or a true crime curious person and you are looking to go beyond an hour-long podcast episode about Gacy and you want to know more about the victims and their families and their stories. The next book that I read was Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is the story of a Polish woman and the mysterious deaths that occur in the town that she lives in, which is near the Czech border. It explores themes of animal rights, the hypocrisy of religion, revenge, and power. And the central idea around this book is the value of life and which lives matter. My rating of this book is 4 stars. This book has grown on me since I finished. Originally, I was probably going to give it 3 stars, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's a 4-star book. In the grand scheme of things, this is a 4-star book for me. I definitely enjoyed the second half of this book more than the first half. It was a little slow for me to start, and I found myself not really connecting with the main character, but once we meet, I guess it was around when we met Boris, the entomologist, is when things started to pick up. I started to feel more compassion for the main character, and there's definitely like a philosophical bent to this book. The main character, who is the narrator, she shares a lot of philosophical thought. It's like philosophy under the guise of fiction. There were a lot of passages, especially in the second half of the book, that I found myself highlighting and underlining, and there were many in the first half too. I think because I was more warm to the main character, I guess, I was more ready to hear what she had to say. I was thinking about why I didn't like the main character at the start, and yeah, she's definitely meant to be a little bit of an unlikable character, a little quirky, a little weird, definitely weird, thought of as weird by the townspeople in her village. And I mean, usually I like those characters, unlikable characters, and like quirky and weird people in real life. Those are some of my closest friends. But yeah, I think she just came across as a little too like dry, I'd say. Not cold, but just like a little dry for me. But I stuck it out, and I'm glad I did, because it really paid off for me in the end, and I really felt connected, and it just came full circle, and I enjoyed it. One thing I found relatable about the book and the main character, though, she gives nicknames to people. So one of her neighbors is named Oddball and Bigfoot, but that just felt very relatable to me. Yeah, I feel like if I read this again, the first half of the book would just come alive more for me, but we'll save that. That's a 2025 read. We've only got 1 month left this year, so I'm probably not going to reread this anytime soon, but yes. I think you should read this book if you are a fan of Moshfegh. I've read My Year of Rest and Relaxation and Eileen, and I felt like there were some similarities between Eileen and this book. Definitely not as dark. This book is not as dark as Eileen, but the main character felt kind of similar. She's much older, but there was some similarities, and there is that kind of dry, dark humor involved. So yeah, and if you are a fan of Fleabag, which I am, you should give this book a shot. Next book that I read in November is Deep Work by Cal Newport. This is a nonfiction book that focuses around the idea of deep work, which he defines as a state of distraction-free concentration when your brain is working at maximum potential. He draws a comparison between deep work and shallow work. Shallow work is like the busy work of your day-to-day, especially in an office type setting, you're answering emails, responding to chat messages, on phone calls where you're just in a meeting getting a status report about something and you kind of have to pay attention. Like, you can't do other work, you have to pay attention, but you're not actually doing any work. The book is split into 2 parts. The first makes the case for why deep work is vital, and the second part gives you actionable advice, tips, and tricks for how you can achieve that state of deep work in your own life. So I went back and forth on my rating for this book. Ultimately, I'm giving it 2 stars. This book was written in 2016, which at the time of recording is 8 years ago. And I think there are still some useful tips. I found a couple useful things in this book, but I felt like it was a little outdated. And I also think the perspective from which it was written is a little narrow, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I did like how straightforward the book was, and it still was engaging, and that made everything fast-paced. I think I read it in like a day and a half. You should also know the target audience for this book is the knowledge worker, somebody who works at a desk job or is in a profession where they are just creating mostly from a desk on a computer versus like a tradesperson. And so I knew that going in, there was a lot of references to like office culture, office working, academic settings. I remember what things were like in 2016 in an office, and then I compare them to like recently, and it's just so much worse. So maybe this book is needed more than ever, but I would like to see maybe an update. This is definitely written by a male academic. No shade in that, but I just found that there was, again, mostly centered around an office setting, an academic setting, and there was little to no discussion about family obligations or other internal blocks that might be presenting for why you might not be able to get work done that you would like. If you're looking for help with overcoming imposter syndrome in order to get your deep work done, write your novel, I definitely would not go to this book. Not that I was expecting this book to solve all my problems, but on the topic of how to overcome things that are getting in the way of your work, creative, other pursuits, I would be interested to find an alternative to this book. So if you have one in mind, please leave me a comment and let me know. Okay, bonus book that is not a part of the 6 books that I read, and that is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I DNF'd this book. Not, okay, what is the true definition of DNF? Is it like you put it down forever, or you just stopped reading it and maybe you'll come back to it? Because I definitely think I will come back to it. I was enjoying it. I was almost halfway through, but it just got like to be a little bit of a slog. I enjoy her writing style. I love The Secret History. I love The Goldfinch. But this one was like almost too dense for me. I like the main character, this kind of spunky kid, but I found it was dragging a little bit. I feel like it's blasphemous to say that I DNF'd Donna Tartt, but yeah. The next 2 books that I read in the month of November are Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I am not going to talk a lot about these books. I am not going to critique them. I started reading these books because I wanted to find a book that I knew really well and pick apart what the author was doing, because I wasn't necessarily having to pay attention to the story. I could kind of like sit above it and yeah, learn from it. And so read The Sorcerer's Stone, and then I kind of got sucked into them, and they're definitely like a comfort read for me right now. It's not really the genre my channel is about. I don't really want to give her a lot of airtime considering her views on trans people. And yeah, in December I'm finishing the last book out, and then I'm gonna close my chapter on reading these so I can fill up my reading schedule with other books by different authors. And also these books are so thick, like, yeah, I'm not even gonna pick them up, but they're a lot of pages, and as I was reading them, I was like, man, I could have been reading like 3 books in this span of 1. So, yeah. Anyways, those are the 6 books that I read in the month of November. Thank you for watching so far. If you are still watching, please give me a thumbs up and I will stop talking about Harry Potter. Okay, thank you. I'll see you in the next video.